Hi everybody, and welcome back. This is Jenny, and this is the channel for people who are school counselors that want to do private practice. And this is meant to help support you and give you information to help you along the way. And of course, disclaimer, I am just giving this as information, not as a clinical supervisor or a therapist. So keeping that in mind, today we're going to talk about informed consent, which is going to be a part of the process whenever you're starting to meet with a new potential client. So in the previous videos, we looked at if you hear from a potential client and they want to get started, my recommendation is to send something like what I call a welcome packet. And we looked in the last video about the kind of one part of that welcome packet being questions that you would send to the client, they would fill out, and you would use that to help you kind of with conceptualizing what the client might be needing. And then the other part that we'll talk about today is the informed consent part. So this is going to be information that it is legal, it is ethical to go over with the potential client ahead of time so they know before they really get started and dive into anything, what is it actually that they're signing up for. And so I'm going to show you the main informed consent document, and I will make a copy of this and put it in the comments below so that you can get access to it and take a look at it. This is particularly for the state of Colorado, and the first part here is the disclosure statement. So different states may have different expectations of what you need to put in your disclosure statement. So this one for Colorado, here you're going to start with the information about you. Folks need to know your credentials. Make it a little smaller so we can get through easier. And then they need to know your license number. A lot of the states are going to expect that you give some information about the board that issues your license. So folks know where to go if they have questions, complaints, anything like that, concerns. And then I also have a blurb here that was a necessary element talking about, okay, here's what all the different kind of entities under this board that issues these licenses does and some of the differences between them. Law has changed in Colorado to where you only have to talk about the one that applies to you, but I still have all of them in there. And then we talk about fees. So this is one of the things that you most likely are going to want to make sure to include, no matter what state you are in. You want to talk about what the client can expect to be paying. And I put in mine some information about things like legal situations, and I really try to avoid getting involved in those. So I talk about that. And then billing and payments and kind of how that works and what I may do if I am not getting paid and I need to file a claim with collections to get paid. And then we talk about confidentiality and some of those limits of confidentiality. Email and text messaging may be very convenient, but it is also not really confidential, and that we should try to use, I use an electronic health record system, and it has a HIPAA compliant encrypted kind of messaging system that folks can set it up where it will send a text or an email to notify that there's a message, and then they can get it by going into the secure portal. So similar to what a lot of us have with our doctor's offices. And that's what I would recommend that we use as much as possible. And then you can also talk about things here like a you first policy, where you might say, okay, I will, if we bump into each other somewhere like at the grocery store, I will let you decide if you want to come up and acknowledge me, but otherwise I will respect your privacy. And so it's not that I want to be standoffish or anything, but just valuing you get to have the right, what you want to do there. And then you can talk about the other limits to confidentiality. Maybe another one that has come up before. I have a client who is an adult and they tell you about a situation that happened to them when they were a child where someone was abusive towards them, and that person, even though now your client is an adult and it's not actively happening to them, if you have information as a clinician and mandated reporter that somebody has access to children now who was previously abusing children in the past, then that would be reportable. And so it's good for adults to know that ahead of time. So if they are starting to talk about something from their past, they won't be hopefully surprised if at some point you would need to say, I need to let the proper people know about this person who has access to children, maybe hurting them now. And what can happen there is then your client may end up having a police or social services contacting them to ask them questions. So I try to let folks know things like that in advance. And then we talk about appointments and cancellations and what the kind of policy is for that. This also goes into the fees, where I talk about, for me, there is a fee if you cancel within the 24 hours of when your appointment was going to be. And I also talk here about how my expectation is that we will stay in contact at least on a monthly basis. If that's not happening, then I will discharge you as a client. And part of this is for safety and just, as a clinician, I'm kind of being held liable and responsible in a certain way towards my clients' well-being and safety. And if I haven't seen them and I don't know what's going on, then if something happens and I wasn't really in the know and couldn't do anything to help, it's not a situation that I want to be in. So that's part of why I have that policy about discharging folks after 30 days. And I try to reach out to them ahead of time. But I like to let them know in the first session what's going to happen in case we never talk again, and they can kind of know what's going on. Then it's usually required to say something about how long you're going to keep their records. And so you can see there kind of what that says. And then I have something here talking about emergency services. I don't provide emergency services, and I give some suggestions of where folks can go if they're needing help right away. And then I also, for me, I have a professional will, and I have somebody who I have designated and has agreed to be the person who will reach out to my clients and let them know what's going on and help them find help if I am incapacitated or if I die and I'm not able to help them at that point myself. And of course, that person, that designee, is another licensed professional who is under the same kind of guidelines as me. And so therefore, it's okay for me to be sharing that information with them in this emergency type situation. So I let them know about that. Also, in confidentiality, I forgot to say that I have something in there about just that I consult with others, so they just can know that that's going to be a part of things. And then I talk about the role of therapist and some of the elements that go into that there are professional boundaries, and engaging in social media, accepting gifts from clients are things that I'm not really allowed to do. It's unethical. And then just that therapy is time bound, that we would expect to have a certain time that we would hopefully meet goals and be able to terminate. And then I have another reminder here that I talked about earlier around that this is really to work on treatment goals and not do other things like filling out forms, providing court testimony, and that kind of thing. Then I talk about some things, and I've highlighted it. So I tried to highlight every place where it's kind of specific to me and you would want to change it for you. My educational background, certifications, theoretical orientation. And then the very bottom is your consent for mental health services, mutual understanding, agreement, and then people would sign there. So again, I have this set up into an electronic health record to where it kind of automatically makes it easy for folks to sign. If you wanted to use it in the form that it is here, which is a Google Doc, you can make it to where folks can sign it. It is not very sophisticated, but in the signature portion here, you can go to Insert, Drawing, and then do a new drawing. Then you go to where there's a line and choose the scribble, and then you can sign it that way. Then you save it and close it, and there's your signature. So, and you may want to make it a little smaller, but you can walk your clients through doing it that way if you really want to save money. But of course, you get what you pay for, and may kind of feel weird to clients to sign it that way. So up to you, but just so you know the options. And then there's the teletherapy portion of informed consent. So if you're going to do any kind of virtual sessions, you need to have something specific to that is separate and in addition to the disclosure statement and other informed consent that you are putting out there. So here this talks about risks and benefits of doing teletherapy and talking about electronic communications and kind of the expectations around that. And then confidentiality. There's going to be some specific things that we need to do when we have a teletherapy session. So one of those things is with making sure that you and the other person are in a private location. You don't have as much control over that, especially when your client is somewhere else. You can only control where you are, and then try to encourage them to be in a private location as well. There's an assessment that you need to do each time you meet with someone through telehealth to just make sure that they are appropriate, at an appropriate level to be able to do it. So if they are in crisis, it's not really as good to do it virtual distance counseling. You need to know resources for that client, for the location that they are in. You also need to make sure you're talking ahead of time about what's going to happen, not only in an emergency, but also if technology cuts out, what are we going to do? And then we'll talk again about fees. One thing to note is that insurance companies may change their policies, or some may already have a difference where they don't pay for telehealth. So people should know that. And then I guess one more thing just to kind of throw in there, which I don't know that this form necessarily talks about it, but just for you to know, you need to verify the location of where your client is each time that you meet for telehealth. So that's important because, again, if there's an emergency, you need to know right where they are so you can direct people to help them. And so that's information on the telehealth side of consent. Then there's a notice of privacy practices, and this is something that HIPAA requires they need for us to give this to every potential new client, and the client needs to know. And this is kind of a boilerplate that I got, and then I had a lawyer look over all these forms. So again, this works, at least in the state of Colorado. And I'm not going to go through the details here. You can look in your copy if you want to see what all it has to say. And then I have something at the very end that is basically just giving me authorization to contact people in an emergency, and also gives me permission to use the client's email address and phone to communicate. And again, I do talk to them about how that's not a secure way to communicate. It may just be useful for things like, hey, I'm at your office door and it's locked. Things like that. Or, were we meeting tomorrow? I forgot. Those kind of things maybe are okay. Although even then, I encourage folks to use the online secure portal as much as possible. For one thing, I don't have to go in and write a note to say, okay, we had this text exchange. It's just already in the system when I use the EHR, and I'm paying good money for that, so I want to use it. So that's my personal take on that. Anyhow, this is basically the informed consent. And I do send this ahead of time for clients to look at, but then I also will have them take a little time that we highlight certain things, and just gives a chance for them to ask questions also when we're meeting. So I do both, and I recommend that others do that as well, just to make sure that you're really giving time and space for the informed consent process to take place. And then when you write your note for that first initial intake session, you're going to want to note, okay, we talked about informed consent and the client signed the documentation for that. So that is basically the informed consent side of things. I went over it fairly quickly, and I think there's lots of places where you could go to get more training on what all it is, what all would need to go into it, and you can talk to lawyers and things if you have forms that you want to make sure are compliant in your situation and in your location. So I hope that's helpful, though, to get you started, and we will continue next time with what I think will be kind of exciting and fun. I'm going to show you what it looks like when the mock client that we were talking about a couple of videos back fills out all the paperwork. I'm going to fill it out on behalf of that mock client, and then I will show you in this next video, what do I do with it? What does it look like? And then how do I use it to kind of conceptualize this case and start to draft some treatment plan ideas, start to do some differential diagnosis, and just kind of how it all sort of works. So I look forward to seeing you then. And in the meantime, I wish you well, and please remember you have options and opportunities.